This is the first part of probably what would be four or five, maybe even six takes on the time that I worked and lived in Saigon, which is today is known as Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. In the day, forever, it was known as Saigon. Saigon was settled in the 4th century, very old city, and went along through Mandarins and whatever, until the French showed up in the 1860s and grabbed it as a colony and developed rubber plantations and built a lot of really quite wonderful architecture. They built in Saigon itself, and I'm going to call it Saigon rather than Ho Chi Minh City, um, but partially because the folks who lived there, when I have returned, I've been back to Vietnam several times, three times. And when we go into Saigon, our guides and people who are interface with us call it Saigon rather than Ho Chi Minh City. So we'll do that. But anyway, the French showed up and they built some wonderful stuff. They built the Opera House. They built the City Hall. They built the cathedral, the Catholic cathedral, and a number of other things. So it is a beautiful. The core city is a beautiful architecture. They built the Continental Hotel. We'll talk about the Continental Hotel in a few minutes after later on. After that, I was up country at Nha Trang, and I was running the intelligence section, known as S2 in military parlance, for a battalion, a psychological operations battalion, and I'd been doing that for 6, 7, 8 months or so. And tours in Vietnam in those days were 1 year, unless you're a Marine. Those guys spent 13 months there. So by the spring of 1968, I was getting what it's called getting short, and I was down to probably about a month or 6 weeks before I'd be heading on home and getting out of the army. Now, by that time, I'm a captain, and I'm it's a pretty good life. We'd been attacked, and it was under the Tet attack in January, which was pretty severe. But after that, things kind of settled down, and the Trang was kind of a nice life. Well, um, there's sort of this feeling about people who haven't been in the military that you're just ordered around to things, and that maybe that's pretty much true for if you're enlisted. But as an officer, you can kind of accept an assignment or talk your way out of it, or but if they really want you to do it, of course you'll go do it. So I wound up as the head of intelligence because I did not want to run our company up in Pleiku, up in the Central Highlands. And so they said, well, okay, how about this? I said, no, yeah, that's fine. And so I had come in from the field where I'd been with 101st, 82nd Airborne, and those guys as attached with a field team. And now I'm in the Trang, and I'm beginning to pack up my stuff when I get an invitation to come down to Saigon and to talk about a project, which is basically an embassy project. Um, which would be to develop a cultural magazine for the 135,000 Vietnamese employees. Now, why were they doing this? Because after Tet, um, and none of this ever wound up widely known, but we began to have demonstrations of the Vietnamese uh, citizenry outside our military installation saying essentially go home GI and that kind of stuff. We were also, and this was completely unknown, uh, at least at least the press never found out about it. We were being attacked up on the demilitarized zone, the point between South and North Vietnam, which that demarcation had been set up in the Paris Accords in 1954 when the French threw in the towel and went home, and the United States came in and took over the effort in what became South Vietnam. So, in any case, I go down to Saigon and I meet with let's just say, a very highly placed individual. the way Vietnam was organized was the ambassador was number one. The military head of our military units in Vietnam was number two. In this case, it was General Westmoreland. Uh, and then you had a number three, and it was civilian, military on down the line. And I met with, let's just say, one of the top three people, and they were very candid with me. They said, we're getting in trouble here. Um, we're among the things that we're going to do is we're going to start a cultural magazine. We have the impressions all set up to print them up at the Printing and Publication Center up in Tokyo, and we have a name, Thong, Com, CAM, and that stood for, and it meant rather, mutual understanding in Vietnamese, and they even had a logo, a good logo as well. And so beyond that, what we need is somebody who can take it and run with it, and we don't have anybody who looks like they might be able to. And we've been thumbing around, looking around, and we found you in your resume, and you have a master's degree. You're just short of a PhD in journalism. You've worked in television, you've worked in radio, you have extensive newspaper experience before you came into the military, and you've been running our psychological operations. So you've got a top secret clearance. You've been looking at top secret stuff. You know what the hell's going on. Uh, insofar as as we've told you on our top secret clearances. And finally, and they said crucially, two other things. One, I was a captain, which was enough rank to kind of get enough respect around in other places that people wouldn't blow me off. And the other thing, and it was interesting, they said, you're seasoned. You were here for TET, you were out with um, military units, so you have a pretty good sense of what things are like here because you've been here almost a year. And we would like you to stick around longer and to take this project, which we will set it up at the 4th Psychological Operations Group in the Saigon rail yards, and you will have the right to hire 10 Vietnamese. We'll give you a budget of I think 30 or 40,000 a month. You're going to run it as basically an independent operation. Um, Early on, you're going to want to spend 2 weeks in Tokyo, 2 weeks back here in Saigon. You're going to have to negotiate with Sato for your for the color separations. Basically, just we've got to find somebody who'll just take and go do it. Now, in this world and in this life, much is promised. And once you have agreed, they're going to do this, sometimes, a lot of times, most times, everything promised is kind of fades away, and it's not. And I said that to this fellow, nice guy. I was getting along with him, but I said, look, I'm going home in another 6 weeks. I'm getting out of the military. I'm on the majors list, for heaven's sakes. I'll never be a major. I'm not. I'm not a military. I mean, look at me. Do I look military? I said, well, you're not bad. As things go. And I said, well, I'm not a military guy, and I'm not looking to have a military career. Uh, and he said, well, okay. But we are running magazine. We started this kind of magazine out in Tokyo in Japan immediately after World War II for the civilian who we were hiring, who were working for the U.S. government, and the purpose was essentially a psychological operation, psychological warfare, uh, underpinning, which was to say to the Japanese, we respect your culture, and we are interested in your culture, and we want to honor your culture, and that's what the magazine was. It was in the Japanese, which was known Koryu, uh, was was that, and it was in Japanese, 4 color, and then they did a black and white English edition so that everybody would kind of know what's in it, and so on. So he said, go out to Japan. We also did it in South Korea, and we also did have one out in the Philippines, and I forget one of them. I think the Korean one was Shingo no Hokkari or something like that. And he said, take a week or two, go out and talk to these guys, see what we're doing out in Japan, Philippines, and in and in South Korea. And then, if nothing else, come on back and tell me what you saw, what you think, what we should be doing with it, and we'll just go from there. So I did. And when I came back, I went in to see this gentleman whose name I do remember, but I'm not going to share it at this point. And we sat down, we talked, and had a nice talk. And he said, "Well, we'd still like you to do this." And and I said yes. And the reason I said yes was because we got along. I liked the guy. I trusted the guy. He was. We just got along. And so he said, if anybody, this is important at the very highest level. We want this magazine, and we want a first edition of it to be out of here, of 10,000 copies in Saigon within, I think, 30, 60, 90 days. I forget which. Okay. And then step it up, but, well before you leave in 6 months or 8 months, whatever it's going to be, we want full country circulation of 135,000, and we want it to be 48 pages, for color, and we want the black and white edition also, which is, I think, on a ratio of maybe one black and white to every 10 copies of the color thing. And it's basically, will you do it? And also he said, and if anybody gets in your way, just come on down here and just pull up a chair in my office and just tell me who they are, and I will ask them to get the hell out of your way. And if you want to get something done, then you can't have people, and if you want to get it done quickly. Now, if you want to build something, and I built the newspapers in Oklahoma over about 5 or 6 years, I knew where we were going, but it needed to be incremental, for a variety of reasons. Get to when we tell you about the newspaper operations. But if you want it yesterday, then you're going to have to clear everything away. You can't have people in the peanut gallery throwing sand and candy wrappers and stuff in your way. That's how we wound up on the moon. Okay, we didn't waste any time uh, having bickering and dealing with pygmies and putting that project in the valley of the pygmy behavior. Okay, and that was what Tongcam became. They wanted it. They want it now. And once they had decided I'm the guy, then go do it. Just go do it. There's the money. Here's your doing. Go hire the people. Go do. Here's a Quonset hut in the rail yards. Go fetch. And so that's what we did. So I took over, and the idea, there was a lieutenant who had kind of been there, and he'd been there. He was leaving, and he didn't have the chops really to really know how to develop a magazine or do it. And he was soon gone, and so was the officer in charge of him, a captain, who was there. What I had was, um, minder is not the right idea. What I had was an assistant with rank. In this case, a fellow who was basically sitting there. What do you need? As a major, and then he would go make sure that happened, and so on. So we did a couple things initially. We went down to the Vietnamese hiring agency, the U.S., and down there, and we interviewed a lot of. Well, I'm sorry. First, we ran an ad in the Vietnamese local newspapers, of which there were one, and we got a stunning number. I think it was well north of 100 applications for the 10 jobs that we had, and they were highly educated and thoughtful. And I interviewed the best of the best of them, and so we really had a very intelligent and motivated uh, group of people who wanted to be on the staff of this magazine. So, I was able to do that. I hired the bureau chief of Newsweek, Vietnamese bureau chief, of Newsweek, away from Newsweek at the time. And I just had more money than anybody else had, and I had the backing to do this and so on. So we went down there and interviewed him down at that place. And then I identified a French Vietnamese young woman, very smart, very literate, very fine. And I got everybody else on staff except the staff down at the hiring agency, which is staffed by Vietnamese and mostly by Vietnamese women, would not let this young woman, would not approve her to come work for me. And they called her my whore, which she was not. And we did not have any sexual relationship then or ever. But she, that was just sort of the temper of the times, if you will. So anyway, soon enough, I did what needed to be done, and they were told to get out of the way, and so we went ahead and hired her and put her on our staff, and then set to work. I got us a equivalent of Twix. We got a mailbox. We got a whatever, and then I went to Tokyo and met with our um, counterparts up in Tokyo. They were very interesting people. The Americans up in Tokyo were very interesting because they had come out with MacArthur into Tokyo Bay right at the end of the war in September of 1945, and they just stayed and became staff. And one of them said, I was with MacArthur when we came in, and MacArthur said, "You see that land across the way?" And he goes, "Yeah." He said, "Well, go over there, and grab hold of it, and you run that part of Saigon, and then or Tokyo, and then you go here and go here, and I'm going to take this suite in this hotel, and I'm going to run Japan out of." So these guys had been out there for a very long time, and certainly were well read into the cultural magazine they were doing. But and I'm going to wrap it up with this before we then get into the magazine itself in the next text. But um, they were no longer Americans. They were internationalists. They were fascinating people because they had lived now more than 20 years in Japan, and they would go back to the United States on maybe once a year or so and see their family and so forth. But they were what I called internationalists. They didn't think in terms of what's good for the United States and what's going on in the United States. And most importantly, they didn't know what was going on in the United States in terms of understanding what was going on in their own country. And at the end of this project, by the way, I was offered an opportunity to stay, very well paid, and come to Japan and join Voice of America and kind of pick up on what we're doing. They were at a point where they were beginning to have to rotate out people retiring. And on one hand, it would have been really an interesting thing to do. But on the other hand, I looked at these folks and I said in my own mind, I'm an American. I'm not an internationalist. And if I come out here and I work here, I'll be well compensated and I'll become a citizen of the world, at least in my own mind. And I will lose touch with my own country and what's going on. And I'll be like these guys are and ladies, that kind of don't understand the dynamic of how the United States was changing and what the war protests were about and how other things were happening and how could Martin Luther King be assassinated next month, Robert Kennedy be assassinated in May, June of 1968, and how the Democratic Party fell apart and went at one another in Chicago in August. What the hell is going on? Believe me, I didn't understand either, but I understood this. If I stay here, I'll never have a good, clean take, granular on the ground of feeling my country, and I am an American. And so at the end of when I finished up the project of this magazine, and when it was in a position where I was ready to hand it off because I had it up to 135,000, I had it up to 48 pages, I had it countrywide, and I did all of 6, 7 months. And then I went home. And I went home because I'm American. I'm an American then, And I've always been an American, and I'm proud of that. And we'll talk about the actual nuts and bolts of how we ran the magazine. And we're going to talk about life in Saigon, which was a beautiful city with great architecture and folks who I really loved working with the Vietnamese. And we will tell you almost the entire story of Tongham magazine, including long after I left, how I found out what happened to my staff and what happened to my magazine when Saigon and the country fell on April 30th, 1975. But that's coming.